Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Tiffany if you're new here. Today I'm going to be talking to you about picking that first international solo travel destination and some of the things that you want to think about when picking a place to go, because it can be very overwhelming. I mean, there are, a lot of places to choose from, and not just countries, but even places within countries. Let's jump right into it. The very first thing that I suggest for your very first solo trip out of your country is that you pick some place that is relatively close by. There aren't too many places in this world that don't have an international destination nearby. So for example, if you're from the US and you want to go somewhere international for the first time, I suggest you pick something close to home: Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean. If you're in Europe, pick another European country. It's pretty easy in Europe. It's actually pretty easy in Asia as well. So those are just a few examples. You want to pick something that's maybe a 3 to 5 hour flight away from home. That way your anxiety about being far away from home is lessened by the fact that you're really not that far. If you can and you feel comfortable doing it alone, I also suggest maybe picking a place that you could drive to, because then you have a little bit more feeling of, it's not that far, I drove here, I can bail at any time and go home. Another thing you want to think about is your level of comfort being in another country that doesn't speak your language. For a lot of people, that's not a big deal, but I know it's a concern for people. But I will say that almost every place I've been to, even though their English may not be perfect, it's pretty good for me to have basic communication with. So I wouldn't say that language is something that should completely stop you, but maybe for this first trip, you pick a place that either their local language is your local language or something very similar, or they are known to speak English really, really well. That way you have that level of comfort. Like, if I need help, it's not going to be an issue. So maybe you have a little bit of knowledge of Spanish or French from like high school. Use that to your advantage. Maybe take some Duolingo before you go in that local language that you already have a little bit of experience with, and you'll be fine. Another thing that you want to think about is the cost, because traveling alone is always a little bit more expensive because you don't have anybody to split a hotel room or a car rental with, or even a meal with on a solo travel destination. You want to look at the cost of the places that you're going to, if that's something that you need to look out for. Maybe you need to pick a budget destination that's solo traveler friendly for that reason. So you need to look in advance and look at hotels and say, can I afford to stay in a hotel in this destination? If I can't, will I be willing to stay in a hostel? If I'm not, then where are my other options, either in that country or nearby? Because sometimes it's just that particular city that you've picked in that country, and that maybe staying in a lesser known, what they call second or third cities, might be a little bit cheaper. Not always, but sometimes. Or another tip I have for maybe saving money a little bit on your accommodation cost is that you stay slightly outside of the city. Doesn't mean that you're not going to be like in a safe area and you're not going to be able to go do those things. It's just going to take you a little bit longer to get to those things because you're going to maybe have to commute in for like 30 minutes, which, trust me, you're going to feel more like a local than you would if you stayed in the heart and you just, walked out the door and there's the Coliseum, right? Let's talk now about safety, because I think a lot of people worry about traveling solo and how safe it is. Now, I have been traveling solo for most of my life. I don't often travel with other people, and it's never been an issue. I do take precautions, but I've never been worried for my safety. I do research in advance on places that I think I may not have enough knowledge about. A really great example of this is one year I went to Guatemala by myself, and I was going to Antigua, Guatemala, which is very safe. But I needed to go back to Guatemala City the night before my flight because it's kind of a far drive, and I really didn't want to get up super early and try to get to Guatemala City before my flight out. And Guatemala City is known to be a little bit rough around the edges. So I actually have a friend who's from Guatemala, and I spoke to her and I said, hey, where do you suggest that I stay. Now, obviously, you're not going to know somebody in every country, so that's when you do your research online. You look for travel blogs like mine that maybe say, hey, I've been in this country in the last year or this city, and these are the places you might want to avoid. If you can't find that information on a travel blog, then really great travel forums like TripAdvisor, Booking.com. Even if you go and look at hotel reviews, a lot of people will say, hey, I didn't feel comfortable in this neighborhood. The other thing is I would say is most countries are relatively safe. If they weren't, no one would travel anywhere. So as long as you use your common sense, you're going to be fine. I actually made a whole video about getting comfortable solo traveling for the first time and some practices, and I talked about safety a little bit more in depth, and I will link that in the description box below in case you want to check it out. Probably the biggest thing that you want to consider is, what do you want to see? If you have been thinking about traveling, you probably have a list. I don't know if it's in your head, if it's written down, wherever it is. All of us have a list. I have been traveling solo for so long. My list only gets longer, not shorter. So, you have a list of places that you want to go. So take that list, take the things we've already talked about, and narrow it down to, like, say, 5 choices. And then you start looking at the cost. You look at flights. You say, oh, it's too expensive to go there now. It's the high season. If I go a little bit later, it's going to be a little bit less expensive, and that's a better option for me. And then think about what you're comfortable doing in that country alone. Because if you say, pick a country like Italy, and you decide, I'm going to go to Venice. Well, Venice is great, but Venice is also kind of known as a place for couples. Greece is a great place to come solo. But let's say you've decided to go to Santorini, another place that is known for having lots of coupley things to do. It may not bother you. You may not care. I don't care. But if you don't want to be that single person sitting at dinner by yourself, then maybe you don't go to this romantic destination place, or you don't go to some spring break location place where everybody is there with their large friend group. Another thing about traveling solo and picking a place is if you're comfortable navigating local transportation by yourself. This is particularly true if you don't speak the local language. Are you going to be comfortable getting from the airport to your hotel, either on the metro, on a bus, or even getting a taxi? Because if you're not comfortable doing that alone, you need to pick a place that's more comfortable. Where can I go where the airport is in town, and I'm only going to have to take the metro like 4 stops? So that way you have your list, and then you can narrow it down. Because my list is probably, 50 places long, if not longer. So I'm sure that yours is long enough that it's going to be hard to decide. I don't, however, suggest you put a map on the wall and throw a dart at it. Probably not a great way to pick a first place to go. Okay, you may be wondering, well, Tiffany, what do you suggest? Where do you suggest I go on a first international solo trip? I have a whole blog post on this. It's not so much international for everyone because I can't be international for everyone, but I will tell you the places that I think are easy and either speak English really well, or they're small enough that you can operate in without having to do a lot of research about getting there. And all of these places are completely safe to be in by yourself. London, obviously, super easy. It's a big city, but it's easy to navigate. It's pretty well known as to how to get to the airport, into town, where areas are good, what areas are not, and you have a variety of different options for accommodation. One of my personal favorites is Florence, Italy. It's one of those second cities to Rome. It's much smaller. You can walk the entire city. You never have to get on public transportation there. And it's very, very safe, and it's stunningly beautiful. However, Florence is a little bit more expensive than some of these places, and because it is a little bit smaller, there are not a lot of options for various different kinds of budget accommodation. So one thing to keep in mind about that. Another place that I really thought was a great solo destination in Asia is Bangkok. I went there many years ago, and I wasn't technically by myself. I did go by myself, but I was there for a conference. But I really thought the city was really easy to get around. They do have public transportation. Yes, they don't necessarily like have signs everywhere in English, but most things had signs in English, and obviously every one of my hotels spoke English. The metro was really easy to operate, and I felt super safe there. And it can be relatively inexpensive. My tried and true favorite, Greece. Almost everywhere in Greece is going to be great for a solo destination, except for Santorini, like I said earlier. Although I think it's fine. Both times I've been to Santorini, I've been by myself. Great thing about Greece is everybody in the tourist industry pretty much speaks English, and if not, hand gestures will get you a lot of places here. And accommodation is relatively cheap, so it's easy to come and have a fairly inexpensive holiday hanging out on a Greek beach. Another place I really liked was Dublin, Ireland. They speak English, although might be hard to understand them sometimes. But actually, I went and I was super surprised about it. It was one of those destinations I didn't have a lot of expectations for, and I really loved it. And the food was really good. And no one ever, it was probably one of the few places that I didn't have an interaction with people where they're like, oh, you're by yourself. Everybody's like, oh, you're by yourself, how great, So I loved that. I love it when a place makes you feel welcome as a solo traveler. Another place that I recommend because it's small, and it's one of these second cities, is Porto, Portugal. Very walkable. The only caveat to Porto is getting from the airport into town is a little bit not great. But also I arrived really late at night, so that might have something to do with it. But other than that, it was super easy to walk around. There are hostels. It's super easy to navigate, and there's a lot to do in the area, and everything was super easy to figure out. Like getting on the train to go somewhere else was easy, and it's pretty easy to get to Portugal from most of Europe. And it's not Spanish, but almost everyone I dealt with there spoke some level of English. I'm sure that all of you have really great suggestions about cities in countries that you thought were great for being a solo travel destination. So tell us in the comments below which ones you think would be good for a first international solo trip. I would love to hear, and tell us why. That would be great. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I hope you'll hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.